Hey everybody, welcome into the Alabama Recruiting Show. I'm Hannah Chalker alongside our Crimson Tide recruiting reporter, Chris Kirshner. Chris, happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you.
It's good to be back. Hope you guys are having a good Monday too. I know Coach Nick Saban's having a good week. He recently hired a new QB coach. We're going to get into that in just a second. We're also going to talk about all the top recruits that visited this past weekend. We have a lot to go through. And Isaac Taylor-Stuart, you had a chance to catch up with him, interview him, and we'll have that audio a little bit later in the show. That interview was fun, right?
Yeah, definitely fun. Definitely a guy who speaks with a lot of energy. Five-star cornerback, big-time target for the Crimson Tide. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does come National Signing Day.
All right, so a really good 30-minute show coming up for you guys, but let's start with that brand new QB coach in Tuscaloosa, Dan Enos. He was with, Michigan for a couple of weeks there as the wide receivers coach after being let go from Arkansas when Brett Bielema was fired in November. So he was the offensive coordinator. He was the QB coach with the Hogs, actually coached the Allen brothers there, had a pretty good resume with pro-style type quarterbacks. What do you think about this hire in Tuscaloosa?
I definitely think it's a big hire for Alabama. Enos is considered one of the bright offensive minds in all of college football. And it's interesting to see what's going to happen this upcoming season in Alabama's quarterback room, arguably one of the biggest scrutinized position groups in all of college football, because you have a guy like Jalen Hurts, who is a former SEC Offensive Player of the Year, and obviously Alabama fans know what happened. Hurts gets replaced in the second half of the national championship game. And, with Tua Tagovailoa now, the freshman leads them back to a national championship win over Georgia. It's going to be interesting to see what Enos does. It's definitely a good problem for any coach to have, just because any coach wants two skilled quarterbacks in their quarterback rooms, and that's what Alabama has. I know Alabama fans are definitely concerned with Jalen Hurts just because of what transpired in the national championship game. So it's going to be interesting to see. I do think this move by Alabama hiring Enos benefits Tagovailoa, just because, in my opinion, Tagovailoa is a more polished passer than Jalen Hurts. So it's going to be interesting to see what Enos does next season. But if I had to guess, I think Tagovailoa is going to be the starting quarterback. Yeah,
Enos is definitely known for his pro-style offenses with his quarterbacks, and he was the head coach, the offensive coordinator with Austin Allen, and he led the entire SEC in passing in 2015. So you think this will definitely benefit Tua, who routinely shows us he can deliver the ball.
Yeah, I definitely think it benefits Tua. Again, we go back to the national championship game. Tua was clearly the better passer than Jalen Hurts. So with Enos, like you said, an offense that is pro-style, with elements of the spread, and Tagovailoa is listed as the nation's #1 dual threat quarterback in last year's recruiting class. But sometimes that dual threat label gets a negative rap per se. But Tagovailoa definitely has all the talent in the world, the arm strength, the accuracy. So I do think this benefits Tua more so than Jalen Hurts. But again, with Enos there, I think Jalen Hurts can definitely learn some things under Coach Enos.
Awesome. We want to get your thoughts, too, on what you think about Enos, what you think about the QB battle. We're going to get to your questions and comments in just a little bit. But speaking of quarterbacks, Alabama hosted a couple of top prospects this weekend. They're having trouble, it seems, nailing down a guy, but you've got the update. Let's start with Brock Purdy.
Yeah, Brock Purdy, a 3-star quarterback out of Arizona. Purdy seems like the likeliest guy to join Alabama's class at this time. There are 3 big-time targets left on the board at quarterback. Brock Purdy is one of them. I spoke with him shortly after his official visit, his first ever visit to Tuscaloosa. Things went very, very well. Heading into that trip, Purdy told me that he was looking to see if Tuscaloosa was a great college town. That's one of the big things he's looking for. And he did say that Tuscaloosa fit his needs as far as being a good college town. He also told me that he's down to 3 schools at this time: Alabama, Iowa State, and UCF. But again, Alabama fans are going to be like, well, obviously he's going to choose Alabama, but that's just not the case at this point. He told me that he's wanting to extend his recruitment all the way until National Signing Day on February 7th. because, you know, Iowa State and UCF definitely present better paths to early playing time. With Alabama having Tagovailoa, who's going to be a sophomore next year. Who knows if he stays all 4 years. And then you have Jalen Hurts, too, who's still in the picture. You have Mac Jones, who is a redshirt freshman heading into next season. So the path to early playing time just isn't there at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see if Purdy, who, again, in my opinion, is the likeliest guy to join the class, is willing to wait and redshirt at least one season before ever seeing the field in Tuscaloosa.
The Tide also hosted Princeton QB commit Brevin White. What is his status with the Tide, and who else is in the mix?
Yeah, Brevin White, definitely an interesting guy for sure. When it comes to Alabama recruiting, he actually was offered by the Crimson Tide the day before he got on a red-eye flight to Tuscaloosa for his official visit. Brevin White comes from California, committed to Princeton. There aren't many four-star quarterbacks, four-star prospects in general who are committed to Princeton, but you know, White definitely you know, is big into academics. He's committed to one of the most prestigious academic universities in all of the world. So it's just going to come down to whether or not he's going to prioritize going to one of the most prestigious academic schools in the country, or is he going to go to one of the most prestigious college football teams in all of the country. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But there hasn't been much talk from speaking to people close to the Alabama program about just where Brevin White stands at this time. White himself has been quiet after taking an official visit to Tuscaloosa, so there's really not much to know about Brevin White. But also Alabama is recruiting four-star quarterback James Foster, in-state prospect out of Sidney Lanier High School in Montgomery. Foster is a big-time Alabama fan, grew up wanting to attend the University of Alabama. But it just, at this time, it seems like Purdy and White are the preferred options. I don't expect Foster, even if Purdy and White decide to go elsewhere, I don't really expect Foster to end up in the Crimson Tide's class, just because Alabama really isn't prioritizing him all that much at this time.
We were talking before the show, and you thought Purdy really has the edge here, though. Why is Alabama having such a hard time nailing down a QB commit in 2018?
Yeah, I mean, there have been lots of options for Alabama in this class. Lots of kids have decided to go elsewhere, and it's because of what I just said. That quarterback room in Tuscaloosa, not only is it very talented, but it's also very young. And you know, if you're an elite prospect in the 2018 class who plays quarterback, the path to early playing time just isn't clear at this time. You may have to wait 2-3 years before ever getting your chance, because it seems like to me, as we said, Tua seems like the likely quarterback going into next year. He's only a sophomore. Who knows if he stays throughout all 4 years. So at this point, you know, if you're a 2018 quarterback, you know, there are definitely more attractive options elsewhere, because there's only one quarterback on the field at every time. It's not like, you know, a running back who circles in and out. You know, a running back may get the ball 3 times, the next running back comes in, he gets the ball 5 times. Quarterback, you know, they're playing one quarterback throughout the game. So that's why Alabama has definitely struggled when it comes to landing a 2018 quarterback. But at right now, those 3 names that I mentioned, Brock Purdy, Brevin White, and James Foster, are the only targets that Alabama is considering at this point.
All right, so there is your quarterback update. Mitchell Vickery in the comment section says, what about the cornerbacks? It's like he can see his rundown, because that is the exact next topic that we're talking about. Alabama hosted 2 top cornerback prospects. That's Isaac Taylor-Stuart, who we are going to hear from later in the show. Chris got an interview with him. And Elijah Griffin. What is the status with those 2 cornerbacks, and how was their visit this past weekend?
Yeah, both of them definitely had a good visit to Tuscaloosa. Both 5-star prospects, so obviously the interest in those 2 guys is going to be very, very high. With Isaac Taylor-Stuart, at one point Alabama was his leader going into his junior season. That was after his first ever visit to Tuscaloosa. So getting him back on campus, reigniting that feeling that he had back in 2015 when he named Alabama his leader, is definitely a big deal. As far as Elijah Griffin, 5-star cornerback, the son of West Coast legendary rapper Warren G. His dad was actually in Tuscaloosa with him, but at this time I don't expect Elijah Griffin to be in Alabama's class. You know, Alabama likes its cornerbacks to be over 6 feet, and he showed up to Tuscaloosa, and he's right at the border of 5'11" and 6 feet. So I don't think he really fits what Alabama's looking for when it comes to cornerback. So I don't think Griffin is going to end up at Alabama. Expect him to either choose USC or Tennessee. He named Tennessee his leader earlier this month after shortly decommitting from UCLA. So I think it's down to those two schools. As far as Isaac Taylor-Stuart, he told me that it's down to 4 schools: Alabama, USC, Texas A&M, and Tennessee, who he'll visit this upcoming weekend. But it's interesting to see what happens as far as the secondary goes in this class. Alabama has 3 signees at cornerback and safety, in Josh Jobe, Jalen Armour-Davis, and Savion Smith. Alabama would like to add at least 2 more prospects. It should be noted that Alabama also hosted 3-star cornerback Eddie Smith, who the staff is very, very high on. I expect right now that Alabama signs 5-star cornerback Patrick Surtain Jr., nation's #1 cornerback, and 3-star cornerback Eddie Smith. But if Alabama, say Alabama has to get a preferred walk-on at quarterback, or it misses out on 2 offensive line targets in Nicholas Petit-Frere and Penei Sewell, potentially then Alabama goes and gets a 3rd defensive back, and that's when a guy like Isaac Taylor-Stuart could see his way into the mix.
Expanding on Isaac Taylor-Stuart for just a moment, his recruitment's been kind of all over the place, and he's really like a big-bodied cornerback. He's not one of these like linebacker safety hybrids. He's like a traditional cornerback, and that's the kind of player that Saban gets and really sets the team apart. You win national championships with guys like Isaac Taylor-Stuart. He's like the next Minkah Fitzpatrick, right? Would you say? Yeah,
I mean he's 6'2". He's run a low 4.4 in the 40s. He's been clocked in the 4.3s. Very, very fast. The only thing about Isaac Taylor-Stuart that I have concerns about is his ball skills. But again, he's a defensive back for a reason. That's definitely something that can improve. But I wouldn't classify him as a Minkah Fitzpatrick type just yet. He's definitely, you're very fast, but I mean, he's definitely elite prospect. As we mentioned, he's a 5-star, but he's definitely, he's got that track speed that a lot of coaches covet. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I do think Alabama is strongly in the race here. We'll see what happens when he visits Knoxville this upcoming weekend.
It's just been so fun following his recruitment. I'm excited to see where he ends up going. We're going to talk about another safety in just a moment, but let's hop over to the other side of the ball for a second. 4-star wide receiver prospect out of Pensacola, Florida. That's Jacob Copeland, one of Alabama's top receiver targets. He was in Tuscaloosa as well. Everybody we're talking about today was in Tuscaloosa this past weekend. What's the news from him?
Yeah, I think it's down to Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee for Jacob Copeland. He's definitely one of those recruits. Every time he's in Tuscaloosa, has a very, very good time. Hung out a lot with Mack Wilson. He's very close to Mack Wilson, and in my opinion, Mack Wilson has turned into Alabama's best recruiter as far as the players go. Wilson's always in the ear of the recruits when they visit Tuscaloosa. But again, at this time, I don't really know if Copeland's going to end up in Alabama's class. They do have other wide receiver targets on the board. Not to say that they're higher. Copeland can definitely commit if he wanted to, but Alabama's also recruiting Justin Ross, an in-state prospect, and Jalen Waddle, a 4-star wide receiver out of Texas. But the thing with Copeland is that he's taken so many visits to Tuscaloosa this year. But he was one of those guys who was very close to Jeremy Pruitt, even though Pruitt wasn't going to be his position coach. Pruitt was his primary recruiter. He actually told me earlier this month that if Pruitt stuck on the staff with Alabama, he likely would have ended up committing to the Crimson Tide and signing with them come National Signing Day. But as it stands now, obviously Pruitt is in Tennessee. Copeland is strongly considering Tennessee. As I said, I think it's a 3-team race with Florida and Tennessee being the other 2 schools outside of Alabama. But the thing with Alabama and Jacob Copeland is that Copeland also has a very strong relationship with offensive coordinator Mike Locksley, who was the team's wide receivers coach before Alabama hired Josh Gaddis from Penn State. Gaddis is one of those guys who's considered one of the top wide receiver coaches in the country. So it's interesting to see what happens with Copeland and if he's able to develop a strong enough relationship with Coach Gaddis in these final few days. Once Gaddis was hired by Alabama, the first three people he followed on Twitter were Jacob Copeland, Justin Ross, and Jalen Waddle. So Gaddis hit the ground running there with Jacob Copeland. So I don't know what's going to happen with Copeland. He's definitely one of those kids who loves the recruiting process. He loves the attention that all of this brings. He loves interacting with people on Twitter. So I definitely think he's going to keep it fun in these next few days, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Looking forward to seeing where he ends up. That's Chris Kirshner. I'm Hannah Chalker. You are watching the Alabama Recruiting Show right here on SEC Country. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I see your questions and comments coming in. We're going to get to those in just a minute, including an update on an Alabama kicker. So just hang with us. We will get there in just a moment. But we've been talking about a lot of guys that visited Alabama this past weekend, but the Tide was not the only school with 4 and 5 prospects on campus, 4 and 5 star prospects on campus. Auburn and Florida had a lot of guys too. Give us the update on which top guys were there, and some of them were actually still committed to Alabama, so recruitment's still well underway.
Yeah, we'll start with Auburn. Auburn hosted 4-star wide receiver Justin Ross, who we just talked about. He's been a big-time target for Alabama for over a year. Former teammates with Markel Benton, who will be a redshirt freshman linebacker heading into next season for the Crimson Tide. But the most interesting thing that I learned over this weekend, as far as Ross's visit to Auburn goes, is that Auburn doesn't really feel all that confident with where it stands with Justin Ross. That's good news for the Crimson Tide. As I've been reporting now for over a month now, it seems like it's going to come down to Alabama and Clemson. Clemson seemed like it was the school to beat for Justin Ross for several months, dating back to his original trip to Clemson back in March, I believe. After that trip, he said that it was the best visit he's ever been on as a recruit. I know his mother really loves Clemson. She's going to have a big role in where her son winds up. But I also know Justin Ross's grandma wants him at Alabama. So which motherly figure in his life is going to win out in the end. They both have a big say. I do know that for over a month now, like I said, that Alabama has felt good with where it stands with Justin Ross. So when National Signing Day rolls around next Wednesday, as of now, I expect Justin Ross to end up signing with Alabama. He's scheduled to make his commitment live on ESPNU at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So I expect Alabama once again to land his commitment. Auburn also hosted 4-star linebacker Quay Walker over the weekend. We've talked about Walker a lot on this show. Walker is very close to current Tigers linebacker Marcavius Bryant. He considers Bryant one of his best friends, but like Justin Ross, Auburn doesn't really feel comfortable about where it stands with Quay Walker at this time. They don't expect to land Quay Walker. I also don't expect Alabama to land Quay Walker at this time. He's made it very clear to me that losing Jeremy Pruitt and losing Derek Ansley, who was his primary recruiter, plays a big part in his decision. So he doesn't really have the relationships now that he did with Pruitt and Ansley now that they're gone. So as of today, I expect either Georgia, which he'll visit this upcoming weekend, or Tennessee, a school he visited earlier this month, to land his commitment. That's definitely going to be a blow for Alabama, because as we move forward to where another linebacker who's committed to Alabama visited, that's Vernon Jackson. Vernon Jackson visited TCU over this past weekend. Another kid, another linebacker who's been flirting with other schools. So it's going to be interesting to see what Vernon Jackson does at this point. There's definitely a lot of talk with him being in the state of Texas that he ends up choosing one of those in-state schools, either it be TCU or Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M definitely has the best chance at flipping Vernon Jackson. Jackson is expected to be in College Station this upcoming weekend. He has very, very close relationships with that Texas A&M staff. So if Alabama loses both Vernon Jackson and Quay Walker, it's going to be a blow for Alabama, because there just aren't many linebackers left on the board at this time. Alabama is actually bringing in a 3-star linebacker, Jalen Moody, out of South Carolina. Moody is definitely a backup option at this time, just in case Alabama loses both Quay Walker and Vernon Jackson, which is definitely a possibility. And then we move along in the SEC. Florida hosted two big-time Alabama targets. 5-star offensive tackle Nicholas Petit-Frere, one of the nation's top overall prospects, a top 10 prospect in the 2018 class. Petit-Frere visited Tuscaloosa last weekend with his mother. Florida is actually pitching to him that Florida is the better academic school between Alabama and Florida. Academics are very, very important to Petit-Frere and his mother. He has over a 3.8 GPA, attends a private school down in Tampa, so academics are very, very important to him. I know Dan Mullen, from talking to people close to the Florida staff, Dan Mullen stressed to Petit-Frere and his mother that if he goes to Florida, the degree is better than Alabama. That's obviously up to debate for all you people out there, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Petit-Frere. I think it's a 3-team race at this point. He's visiting Ohio State this upcoming weekend. He's very close to Greg Schiano, who is one of his primary recruiters for the Buckeyes. And finally, Florida also hosted 4-star defensive end Malik Langham. He actually told SEC Country's Florida recruiting reporter, Zach Abolverdi, that Alabama still leads for his services. So there is some good news with these targets and commits visiting other schools this past weekend.
Well, like you said a few times, linebackers Vernon Jackson and Quay Walker are still both committed to Alabama. Let's actually give you a refresher, take a look at that commitment list. But let's start with the signees for the 2018 class. Chris, how many are on there?
Yeah, Alabama has 10 signees in this 2018 class. You start off with a guy like Iyabi Anoma, the crown jewel of this class so far, 5-star defensive end, jack linebacker hybrid, actually named the alpha dog of the Under Armour game by 24/7 Sports. Anoma is definitely a prospect who I expect to contribute right away. And then you have guys like Jalen Armour-Davis, a 4-star cornerback out of Mobile. Definitely a guy who can compete for early playing time next season just because that depth in the secondary is very thin. Christian Barmore, big-time signee for Alabama during the early signing period. Alabama really started to prioritize him in November, got him on board. He was actually thinking about taking an official visit to Georgia. Georgia really wanted to host him on campus, but Barmore decided that Alabama was the school for him. And then finally, the kid on the bottom, Skylar DeLong, likely going to be Alabama's replacement at punter next season now that J.K. Scott has exhausted his eligibility. So I expect Skylar DeLong to see the field right away.
One more signee continued. Here we go.
Yeah, Stephon Wynn, 4-star defensive tackle. He's listed as a defensive end, but I expect him to move inside when it comes down to it. Stephon Wynn, one of those kids who transferred from his original high school in South Carolina to IMG Academy, where football is very, very big at IMG Academy, ranked the nation's #1 high school as far as football programs go. And then you got guys that are still committed to Alabama but haven't signed. Bobby Brown, he's expected to visit Texas A&M this weekend. He was once committed to the Aggies. Definitely a concern when you have an in-state kid visiting another in-state program. But from talking to Bobby Brown last week, I really don't expect him to flip his commitment once again. He was committed to Texas A&M, as I said, but I don't expect him to reopen his recruitment like he did before. So, and again, we touched on Vernon Jackson and Quay Walker, 2 linebackers who Alabama could definitely lose in these next few days. And Michael Parker, in-state tight end, expected to get a blue shirt.
So out of those 4 right there that you see on the screen, how many spots are left?
Yeah, I mean, that's still up to debate. Alabama's trying to figure out whether it can take 8 or 9 more prospects. It's definitely going to be a busy week and a half for Alabama recruiting just because there are still so many undecided spots, and Alabama is still trying to make the numbers work.
All right, well, somebody making their decision this week, that's 4-star safety Julius Ervin out of Anaheim, California. He's actually making his decision on Wednesday. Why is he doing it early? National Signing Day just a week away.
Yeah, I mean, some kids, want to get the full attention. If I was a recruit, I'd probably go that route just because.
Of course you would.
Yeah, I mean, I like the spotlight on me, so I would definitely choose that route if I was a recruit, and that's probably why he's going to do that. He's down to 3 schools: Alabama, USC, and Washington. Washington. I don't expect Alabama to land him at this time. Nick Saban's actually planning on flying out to California tomorrow to speak with him and his family. So maybe there's a chance for last-minute dramatics. But as of now, I don't expect Irvin to end up in this class. He did take an official visit to Tuscaloosa last weekend. From talking to people close to the program, it seems like Irvin did have a very good time, but in the end, I think he stays closer to home and commits to USC. So, I mean, as I said, there are so many targets on the board at defensive back. I'm not really concerned about Alabama at this time filling, its final few spots in the secondary, just because there are so many targets still left on the board. And as I said, I think Alabama is in very good position to land 5-star cornerback Patrick Surtain Jr., 3-star cornerback Eddie Smith. And again, at that point, whether or not Alabama will sign a third defensive back remains up for debate. I know Alabama feels good about where it stands with 5-star cornerback Tyson Campbell, but Georgia also feels good about where it stands with Tyson Campbell. And then we have a guy like Isaac Taylor-Stuart, 5-star cornerback, who's down to 4 schools.
All right, good stuff, Chris. Before we get to the Isaac Taylor-Stuart interview in just a few moments, I want to take a few questions and comments. Michael Lee noticed that Alabama got a kicker. A couple of people were asking about the kicker. This happened just an hour ago, right? That that Saban assigned a walk-on kicker. What's going on?
Yeah, Alabama, delivered. I know fans have been asking about this for months now. When will Alabama get a good kicker? But the thing about that is, you never know with these kickers. Alabama has signed top kickers before, and they just haven't panned out. So it's going to be interesting to see. But Alabama did land a walk-on kicker earlier today in Austin Jones, graduate transfer from Temple. He actually tore his ACL. It definitely set him back. But he graduates from Temple as the team's 4th leading scorer in school history. I believe he made 50 of 67 field goals at Temple. But again, it just seems like Alabama's cursed at the kicker position. These kickers can come in highly ranked, highly regarded, and then they get to Alabama and they have a case of the yips, as been the case for several years now. So, but it's important to note that Austin Jones, yes, he's a graduate transfer, but he's not going to be on scholarship. He's going to be a walk-on because, as I said, those numbers are very tight right now. So Alabama can't afford to extend a scholarship Austin Jones's way. So Jones is fine with it, clearly. He took an unofficial visit to Tuscaloosa this past weekend, one of numerous recruits on campus this past weekend. So, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with the kicker situation next year in Tuscaloosa, because Alabama does have a redshirt freshman kicker on board in Joseph Bulovas. He was one of those top-rated kickers in the 2017 class, but he lost the starting kicker job to Andy Papanastos, former transfer himself from Ole Miss. So who knows what's going to happen with kicker? Obviously, with Alabama bringing in Austin Jones, that just tells me that Alabama didn't really feel comfortable about where it stood with Joseph Bulovas, his development so far in Tuscaloosa. From my perspective, I only watch the warm-ups, really, because I don't live in Tuscaloosa, so I don't go to all the practices. I only cover recruiting mainly. But from the warm-ups that I've watched and Joseph Bulovas is kicking, there's definitely concern on my end about his kicking ability. So it was clear to me that Alabama was likely going to have a problem at kicker if it didn't bring in a walk-on to extend extend a preferred walk-on spot. So that's what Alabama did with Austin Jones this past weekend, and then he decided to jump on it earlier today.
Justin James wants a shout out. Hey, Justin, we're running out of time. We have so many good questions today, but you're just so knowledgeable today, bringing in all of the heat. So we're losing time for all of our questions and comments. We're going to try to get to one more in just a minute. But more importantly, you had the chance to talk to Isaac Taylor-Stuart earlier this week, today. When did you talk to him?
I talked to him yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. Awesome. Well, you talked to him about his visit. What was some of the highlights of that conversation?
Yeah, well, first off, you guys can hear the entire interview with Isaac Taylor-Stuart tomorrow. We're going to play a clip here in just a few minutes. But, I talked to Taylor Stewart about that first visit back to Tuscaloosa since 2015, when, as I said early in the show, he named Alabama his leader. Shortly after that visit, Alabama was his leader for several months. But he was young at the time. He started visiting other schools. He started getting other offers. The pressure to stay on the West Coast definitely got to him. So, it's going to be interesting with Taylor Stewart's recruitment if he decides to go play in the SEC. He also told me that he's down to 4 schools, Alabama, USC, Tennessee, and Texas A&M. Most notably, Georgia is left off that list. He was expected to take an official visit to Georgia before National Signing Day. He has canceled that visit. He will not visit Athens. He's only focused on those 4 schools. I also asked him about Jeff Banks, Alabama's new special teams coordinator. Banks was Taylor Stewart's primary recruiter when he was at Texas A&M. He had some interesting comments to say about Banks and how his arrival in Tuscaloosa impacts his decision and whether that helps Alabama at all. There are a lot of good things in that interview with Taylor Stewart. I suggest you guys check out secountry.com tomorrow morning. The full interview will be posted there.
All right, well, let's listen to a short version of it right now, fresh out of Tuscaloosa. We hope Alabama is his leader. Let's take a listen on how this weekend went.
The feeling like how great of a school Alabama is, and then they just came off a national title, still the #1 school, and just like seeing the weight room and the facility, and then just the coaches and everything. So I'm just like having that feeling like I had before 2015.
I know that they've been having the recruits take pictures with the national championship trophy that they obviously won earlier this month. They've been showing the crystal ball around. What is it like as a recruit to know that, Nick Saban, every single signing class that he's had at Alabama has won a national championship? Does that weigh on your mind at all, knowing that if you do choose a school like Alabama, that there's a very good chance that you would win a national championship one day? So how does that affect you?
That definitely weighs in a lot because not too many schools could say they've even been to a national title or like even won one. And basically my main goal is just to win a national title, and then if Alabama is the best place for me, then I'm going to go there and win the title. Because, seeing that crystal ball, that's my first time receiving crystal ball. I was like, whoa, and I actually got to hold it and take a picture of it. It was a pretty awesome moment, and also just being around Coach Saban and all the other great coaches he has.
And then after this official visit to Alabama, how would you classify Alabama's chances of landing you on National Signing Day?
Alabama has a high chance, honestly. I'm going to keep it like that, keep it 100.
He's going to keep it 100 on Alabama. And then you mentioned to him that the recruits were taking pictures with the national championship trophy. There you saw it on the screen. That's got to be big time for those kids.
Yeah, there's a reason why Alabama has that national championship trophy, next to these recruits, because every single recruit wants to play for a national championship one day. And Alabama is definitely taking advantage of it. All the recruits who have visited since Alabama won that game have posed next to that trophy. They've gotten to hold one of Alabama's crystal ball trophies. So, and as Isaac Taylor-Stuart said, standing next to that trophy and holding that crystal ball, it just makes you realize that, if I do go to Alabama, there's a very, very good chance that I'll be playing in a national championship game and potentially winning a championship ring.
All right, we are completely out of time for more questions. We have so many good ones, but good news, we will be right back here next Monday. We will hopefully get to more of those questions and comments, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time, and that's going to be the show right before National Signing Day next Wednesday. Where can everybody follow you and find more information?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at Chris Kirshner. Make sure you guys are following secountry.com in this next week and a half with National Signing Day. Just 9 days away. It's approaching very, very soon. Lots of targets still left on the board for Alabama. It's going to be a wild finish for the Crimson Tide. And next Monday, a big show here previewing everything National Signing Day, which is February 7th
next Wednesday. All right, guys, this has been the Alabama Recruiting Show on the SEC Country Facebook Live. We will see you right back here next Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central. That's Chris Kirschner. I'm Hannah Chalker. We'll see you then.